Have you ever wondered what happens when a fairy tale turns into a nightmare? Imagine being married to a millionaire, living a life of luxury and carrying his child. You feel like the luckiest person alive. Then, in one night, in front of the entire world, he throws it all away for his mistress, publicly humiliating you and questioning whether the baby you carry is even his. This is the story of Isabella, a woman who had everything, lost it all, and then uncovered a secret so profound it left the man who broke her utterly speechless. Prepare for a story of betrayal, revenge, and the incredible strength of a woman scorned. The penthouse apartment on Park Avenue was a testament to Damian Ward's success. It was a cavern of glass, steel, and Italian marble, with panoramic views of Central Park that bled into the sprawling, glittering expanse of Manhattan. For Isabella Rossi, it had once felt like living in a star. Now, it felt more like a beautifully appointed cage. She traced the rim of a porcelain teacup, the chamomile steam warming her face. At 7 months pregnant, her body was a landscape of new curves and gentle aches. She had hoped the baby would be a bridge, a way to span the growing emotional chasm between her and Damian. He had been thrilled, initially. He'd bought her a diamond bracelet that spelled out Mother in discreet, elegant lettering, and had the nursery designed by a specialist from London. He treated the pregnancy like his latest acquisition, expensive, prestigious, and something to be managed with ruthless efficiency. Damian was a man forged in the fires of ambition. He'd come from nothing, a detail he rarely shared, but which simmered beneath his tailored suits and confident swagger. He was a self-made millionaire, the CEO of Ward Tech International, a tech empire he'd built from the ground up. He was charismatic, brilliant, and to the outside world, the perfect husband. But in the quiet moments, when the city lights were just distant jewels and the silence of the penthouse pressed in, Isabella saw the other side of him. The coldness, the control, the way his love felt conditional, tied to her compliance and her ability to reflect his success. "You're still up?" His voice, smooth and deep, cut through her thoughts. Damian stood in the archway of the living room, loosening his tie. He looked like he'd just stepped out of a magazine, impeccably dressed, his dark hair perfectly coiffed, his jawline sharp and uncompromising. "I couldn't sleep," Isabella said, offering a small smile. "The baby is active tonight." She placed a hand on her swollen belly, a gesture that had become second nature. He nodded, his eyes flicking to her stomach for a fraction of a second before moving on, scanning the room as if looking for imperfections. "Did you finalize the seating chart for the Ward Future Forum?" "This afternoon," she confirmed. "Tessa helped me. We put the Hendersons at your table, as you asked, and I made sure the mayor's wife has a clear view of the stage." "Good." He walked to the wet bar and poured himself a whiskey, the clink of the decanter against the glass echoing in the vast space. "This year's gala is important. The press will be watching. Everything needs to be perfect. Everything needs to be perfect." It was his mantra. Their life was a carefully curated performance, and he was the director. Isabella had once been a vibrant, independent woman with a passion for art history, working at a small but respected gallery in Chelsea. When she met Damian, his world had consumed hers. He'd found her passion quaint and encouraged her to quit her job, framing it as a way to free her from financial worry. In reality, it was a way to make her dependent on him, to fold her into his life until her own identity was just a faint outline. "I was thinking," she began, her voice soft, "after the baby is born, maybe I could start a small art consultancy. Just a few clients. Something for myself." Damian took a slow sip of his whiskey, his eyes unreadable. Why would you want to work? You have everything you could ever need right here. He gestured vaguely at their opulent surroundings. Your job is to be my wife. And soon, a mother. That's more than enough for any woman. The dismissal was so casual, so absolute, that it stole the air from her lungs. There was no room for discussion. The case was closed. She felt a familiar prickle of resentment, but she swallowed it down as she always did. Arguing with Damien was like throwing pebbles at a fortress. Of course, she murmured, looking down at her hands. You're right. He walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. His touch was proprietary, not tender. I have a surprise for you at the gala, Isabella. Something special. A new chapter for us. A flicker of hope ignited within her. Maybe this was it. Maybe the baby really was changing him. Maybe he finally saw her, not just as an accessory, but as his partner, the mother of his child. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his for a trace of genuine affection. "What is it?" she asked, allowing herself a moment of excitement. He smiled, a rare, full-toothed smile that had once made her heart flutter. "You'll see. Just make sure you look stunning. Wear the blue dress, the one that matches your eyes." He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a perfunctory gesture, before turning and heading towards their bedroom. "I have an early meeting. Don't wait up." Isabella sat alone in the cavernous living room, the city lights twinkling like 1,000 unfeeling eyes. The hope that had flickered moments before was already dying, replaced by a familiar, cold dread. His surprise was just another part of the performance. And the blue dress, it wasn't just a suggestion. It was a costume, chosen for her role in his grand production. She placed both hands on her belly, feeling the gentle kick of the life inside her. This baby, she thought, was the only thing in this gilded cage that was truly hers, and she would protect that, no matter what. She had no idea that the stage for Damien's surprise was already set, and the role he had cast for her was not that of a cherished wife, but of a fool. Chapter 2. The Unveiling. The Ward Future Forum was the crown jewel of New York's philanthropic season. Held in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, it was a symphony of clinking champagne flutes, hushed power brokering, and the flash of paparazzi bulbs. Isabella, draped in the sapphire blue silk gown Damien had demanded, felt like a ship in a bottle, beautiful, trapped, and for all to see. The dress was a masterpiece of couture, but it felt tight around her ribs, a physical manifestation of the anxiety constricting her chest. She moved through the glittering crowd with a practiced grace, her smile a carefully constructed mask. She greeted senators, shook hands with banking tycoons, and exchanged pleasantries with their diamond-draped wives. She was playing her part to perfection. Damien was at her side, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back, a silent declaration of ownership. "You see?" he whispered in her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "Everyone is here. Everyone who matters." Isabella nodded, her gaze sweeping over the sea of faces. She saw her sister, Tessa, standing near the bar, looking wonderfully out of place in her simple but elegant black dress. Tessa gave her a small, encouraging smile, a lifeline in this ocean of superficiality. Tessa had never liked Damien. She saw through his charm to the cold, calculating machinery beneath. "He doesn't love you, Izzy," she'd said once, years ago. "He owns you." Isabella had been furious at the time, but now the words echoed in her mind with a chilling accuracy. After the dinner service, the lights dimmed. It was time for Damien's annual address. This was the centerpiece of the evening, the moment he would announce the Foundation's next major project and, in doing so, cement his status as not just a ruthless businessman, but a benevolent titan of industry. He strode to the stage, bathed in a single brilliant spotlight. The room fell silent. He commanded attention effortlessly. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice resonating with confidence. "For years, the Ward Foundation has been dedicated to innovation, to pushing boundaries, to building a better future." He spoke for several minutes about their past achievements, his words weaving a narrative of progress and power. Isabella watched from their table at the foot of the stage, her heart beating a little faster. This was it. The surprise. The new chapter. She smoothed a hand over her baby bump, a nervous, hopeful gesture. "But tonight," Damien continued, his tone shifting, "I'm not here to talk about a new project. I'm here to talk about a new beginning. A beginning built on truth and authenticity." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was a departure from the usual script. "For a long time, I have lived a life that was expected of me. I built an empire. I took a wife. I played the part the world wanted to see." His eyes, cold and distant, found hers in the crowd. There was no warmth in them, only a chilling finality. Isabella's blood ran cold. This wasn't the surprise she had imagined. This was something else entirely. "But authenticity," he said, his voice ringing with false sincerity, "demands that we stop performing and start living. And my life, my true life, is not with the woman you see here." He gestured dismissively in her direction. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Cameras flashed, their light like a physical assault. Isabella felt the world tilt on its axis. Her carefully constructed smile crumbled. Every eye in the room was on her, 1,000 points of judgment and pity. "My true partner," Damien announced, his voice swelling with theatrical passion, "is a woman who understands me, who inspires me. A woman who is my equal in every way." He extended a hand, and from the wings of the stage, a woman emerged. She was tall, stunningly beautiful, with fiery red hair and a dress that seemed poured onto her perfect figure. Isabella recognized her instantly. Sloane Whitmore, a junior executive at WardTech International. She had seen her at company events, a peripheral figure she'd never given a second thought. Sloane walked to Damien's side, her expression a mixture of triumph and feigned modesty. She took his hand, and he raised it to his lips, kissing it for the entire room to see. Isabella felt like she was drowning. The air was thick, heavy, unbreathable. Her vision tunneled, the faces in the crowd blurring into a grotesque tapestry of shock and morbid curiosity. But Damien wasn't finished. The humiliation had to be absolute. He turned his attention back to Isabella, his voice dripping with a cruel, calculated pity. "My wife, Isabella, has been under the impression that we are expecting a child together." The room, which had been buzzing with shocked whispers, fell into a dead, horrified silence. Tessa was already pushing her way through the crowd, her face a mask of fury. "However," Damien continued, letting the word hang in the air, "given the recent distance in our marriage and her desperation to secure her position, I have come to have serious doubts about the paternity of this child. It was a kill shot, a lie so monstrous, so public, that it was designed to annihilate her. He wasn't just leaving her, he was branding her, an adulteress, a liar, a gold digger. He was stripping her of her dignity, her reputation, and even her identity as a mother before her child was even born." Isabella stood up, her legs shaking so violently she thought she would collapse. She could feel the baby kick, a frantic, panicked rhythm, as if it could sense its mother's agony. She looked at Damien, at this man she had loved, this man who was the father of her child, and she saw a stranger. A monster cloaked in a bespoke suit. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. A strange, terrifying calm washed over her. She met his gaze, and for a fleeting moment, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not regret, but a flash of unease, as if her silence was more unsettling than any outburst would have been. Then she turned her back on him, on Sloane, on the entire gasping crowd. With a dignity she didn't know she possessed, she walked away from the stage, her head held high. Tessa reached her, wrapping a protective arm around her. "I've got you, Izzy," Tessa whispered, her voice fierce. "I've got you." As they walked out of the ballroom, leaving the wreckage of her life behind, Isabella knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was not just an affair. The cruelty was too deliberate, the destruction too total. There was something else at play here, a hidden motive buried beneath the layers of betrayal. And as God was her witness, she would find out what it was. Chapter 3. The shattering. The walk out of the plaza was a blur. The opulent lobby, with its crystal chandeliers and gilded ceilings, seemed to mock Isabella with its grandeur. The flashes of the paparazzi who had caught wind of the scandal were like explosions in her face, each one searing the image of her public disgrace into her memory. Tessa, a fierce shield against the onslaught, shoved them aside, her voice a low growl of "Get back!" as she guided Isabella into the waiting taxi. The moment the door slammed shut, cutting off the clamor of the city, the fragile dam of Isabella's composure broke. A sob tore from her throat, a raw, ragged sound of pure agony. It wasn't a quiet cry. It was a storm of grief, a physical wrenching of her soul. She doubled over, clutching her belly as if to protect her unborn child from the shock waves of her pain. "He lied," she gasped between sobs, the words tasting like poison. "In front of everyone. Tessa, he said the baby. He said it wasn't his." Tessa pulled her sister into a fierce embrace, holding her as she shook. "He's a monster, Izzy. A vile, soulless bastard. None of what he said is true. It's a performance, just like everything else in his life." But the words, though meant to comfort, couldn't erase the public branding. The accusation, no matter how false, would cling to her, a stain she might never be able to wash away. Damien hadn't just ended their marriage. He had tried to incinerate her entire identity. They arrived at Tessa's apartment in Brooklyn, a world away from the sterile luxury of Park Avenue. It was a cozy, cluttered space filled with books, legal briefs, and the comforting scent of old paper and coffee. It was real. It was safe. The moment they were inside, the reality of her new situation crashed down on Isabella. She had nothing. Her credit cards tied to Damien's accounts were likely already cancelled. The home she had lived in was no longer hers. The clothes on her back were the last vestiges of a life that had been violently amputated. She sank onto Tessa's worn velvet couch, the blue silk of her gala gown looking garish and out of place. The adrenaline that had carried her out of the hotel was fading, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The psychological shock was beginning to manifest physically. A sharp, cramping pain seized her abdomen. "Oh, Tessa," she whispered, her face pale. "Something's wrong." Tessa's legal warrior demeanor vanished, replaced by the terrified concern of a sister. She saw the pain on Isabella's face, the way she clutched her stomach. "Okay, Izzy. Breathe. We're going to the hospital. Right now." The next few hours were a terrifying haze of fluorescent lights, the sterile smell of antiseptic, and the rhythmic beeping of machines. The doctors at the hospital were kind but firm, their faces etched with professional concern. They diagnosed her with a threatened miscarriage, brought on by extreme stress. She was ordered on immediate and strict bed rest. Lying in the stiff hospital bed, listening to the steady, reassuring thump of her baby's heartbeat on the fetal monitor, Isabella felt the full weight of Damien's cruelty. He hadn't just humiliated her. He had endangered their child. His ambition, his need for a dramatic exit, had been more important than the life they had created together. The love she thought she had for him curdled into something else, something harder and colder. It wasn't just heartbreak anymore. It was a slow-burning rage. The next morning, the legal assault began. A courier arrived at the hospital, delivering a thick envelope. Inside were divorce papers, already filed, and a restraining order, citing her emotional instability and preventing her from entering the Park Avenue penthouse or any property of Wardtech International. It was a masterclass in legal brutality, designed to leave her isolated and powerless. "He's trying to bury you," Tessa said, her voice tight with fury as she read through the documents. "He's painting you as an unhinged, cheating wife to preempt any claim you might have. The paternity clause is a threat. He's saying if you fight him, he'll drag you through a public and humiliating paternity battle." Isabella looked out the hospital window at the grey, unforgiving sky. The woman from the night before, the one who had walked out of the gala with her head held high, felt like a distant memory. In her place was a woman who was terrified, not just for herself, but for the tiny, vulnerable life depending on her. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Tessa pulled a chair close to the bed, taking her sister's hand. Her grip was strong, anchoring. "First, you rest. You keep this baby safe. That is your only job right now. My job," she said, her eyes hardening with resolve, "is to fight back. But he has an army of lawyers, Tessa. He has all the money, all the power. And you have the truth," Tessa countered. "And you have me. He thinks you're a fragile little doll he can break and discard. He's about to find out that you're not. We're not going to play his game. We're not going to fight him on his terms." Over the next few days, as Isabella's physical condition stabilized, a profound emotional shift began to take place. The initial shock and grief started to recede, leaving behind a landscape of stark clarity. She replayed the scene at the gala over and over in her mind. Not the humiliation, but the details. The look on Damien's face, the triumphant gleam in Sloane Whitmore's eyes. It was too theatrical, too perfectly staged. Damien was a pragmatist. A simple, quiet divorce would have been more efficient. The public spectacle, the brutal, character-assassinating lies, it was overkill. Why go to such lengths? Why not just leave? The question began to haunt her, a tiny, persistent hum beneath the noise of her pain. It didn't make sense. And Damien Ward was a man for whom everything had to make sense, for whom every action had a calculated purpose. Lying in that hospital bed, stripped of everything that had defined her life for the past 5 years, Isabella Rossi started to feel something she hadn't felt in a very long time. A spark of her old self. The curious, analytical art historian who knew how to look beneath the surface of a painting to find the hidden story. She realized Damien's betrayal wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a mystery, and the first clue was the sheer, inexplicable malice of his attack. He wasn't just getting rid of a wife, he was trying to erase a witness. But a witness to what? Chapter 4. A glimmer of strength. Leaving the hospital felt like a rebirth. Isabella stepped out into the crisp autumn air of Brooklyn, not as Mrs. Damien Ward, the socialite, but as Isabella Rossi, a pregnant, unemployed woman with nothing to her name but a hospital bag and a sister who would walk through fire for her. The thought, instead of terrifying her, was strangely liberating. The gilded cage was gone. So was the master. Tessa's apartment became her sanctuary. For the first week, Isabella did little more than sleep, eat the simple, nourishing meals Tessa cooked, and listen to the steady rhythm of her baby's kicks. The bed rest order was a blessing in disguise, forcing her to be still, to heal both physically and mentally. The world of galas and designer clothes felt like a dream she was slowly waking from. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, Tessa came home with a large cardboard box. "What's this?" Isabella asked, propping herself up on the couch. "A care package from your old life." Tessa's tone was wry. "One of the maids at the penthouse, Anna. She always liked you. She packed up some of your personal things before Damien's goons could throw them out. Your sketchbooks, some photos, your mother's locket. The things that matter." Isabella's hands trembled as she opened the box. She lifted out a worn sketchbook, its pages filled with her drawings of architectural details from museums, of faces she'd seen on the subway, of ideas for paintings she'd never had the courage to start. Flipping through the pages was like reacquainting herself with a long-lost friend. This was who she was before Damien. This observant, creative, passionate woman. He hadn't destroyed her. He had only buried her. "He never liked me drawing," Isabella said softly, tracing the outline of a gargoyle she'd sketched at the cloisters. "He said it was a messy, unproductive hobby. He said that because your talent was something he couldn't own," Tessa said, sitting beside her. "It was yours." That scared him. That single simple observation struck Isabella with the force of a revelation. All these years, she had contorted herself to fit into Damien's world, believing it was the only way to earn his love. Now, she saw that his love was a form of control, and anything he couldn't control, he sought to diminish. Her art, her opinions, her very essence. This realization was the first real glimmer of her old strength returning. The fear that had paralyzed her began to recede, replaced by a cold, clear-eyed resolve. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a survivor, and survivors fight back. "Okay," Isabella said, closing the sketchbook and looking at her sister with a new fire in her eyes. "Tell me about the legal situation. Everything. Don't sugarcoat it." Tessa, who had been waiting for this moment, pulled a stack of files from her briefcase. "Legally, he's built a fortress. The prenup is ironclad. It entitles you to a one-time payout, but he's contesting it based on the infidelity clause, which his accusation of paternity fraud conveniently triggers. His lawyers are stonewalling, refusing to negotiate. They're trying to starve us out, assuming you'll get desperate and accept a pittance to go away quietly. And the paternity claim? It's his trump card," Tessa admitted, her expression grim. "If we fight the prenup, he'll file a motion to compel a paternity test the moment the baby is born. He'll leak it to the press. He'll turn your child's birth into a media circus. It's blackmail, plain and simple." Isabella placed a protective hand on her belly. The thought of subjecting her child to that kind of public scrutiny was sickening. Damien knew her weak spot. He knew she would do anything to protect her baby. "So we can't fight him head-on," Isabella mused, her mind starting to work in a way it hadn't for years. The analytical part of her brain, the part that could deconstruct a painting layer by layer, was kicking into gear. "He expects a frontal assault. He's prepared for it. So we don't give it to him." Tessa leaned forward, intrigued. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about why. Why the spectacle? Why the paternity lie? It's not about the money. The prenup protected his fortune. This is about something else. It's about destroying my credibility. Why would he need to do that so completely?" She stood up and began to pace the small living room, her mind racing. "Think about it, Tessa. A man like Damien, a man whose entire life is about control and image, doesn't do things without a reason. The gala, It wasn't just an announcement. It was a message. It was a public execution of my character. He wasn't just leaving me. He was silencing me. Silencing you about what? I don't know, but it has to be connected to her. Sloane Whitmore. Isabella stopped pacing, her eyes locking on her sister's. She wasn't just a random affair. Her presence on that stage was just as calculated as his speech. She was part of the message. A new energy coursed through her. This wasn't about getting revenge or winning a settlement anymore. This was about finding the truth. It was the only thing that could truly set her, and her child, free. He thinks I'm sitting here, broken and crying, Isabella said, a wry, humorless smile touching her lips. He's waiting for me to beg. But he's forgotten who I was before I met him. He's forgotten that I know how to do research. I know how to dig. She picked up her laptop from the coffee table, her movements now filled with purpose. He's erased me from his life, cancelled my cards, taken my home. But he can't take my mind. She opened the browser and typed a name into the search bar. Sloane Whitmore. Let's find out who his true partner really is, Isabella said, her voice low and steady. Let's look beneath the surface. Let's find the story he's trying so desperately to hide. Chapter 5. The investigation. The investigation began not with a bang, but with the quiet, relentless clicking of a keyboard in Tessa's Brooklyn apartment. While Tessa handled the legal skirmishes, firing off carefully worded letters to Damien's lawyers to keep them occupied, Isabella delved into the digital ghost of Sloane Whitmore. On the surface, Sloane's story was impressive, almost too perfect. A summa cum laude graduate from Wharton, a rising star at Ward Tech International, a portfolio of successful projects under her belt. Her social media profiles were a curated collection of charity runs, industry conferences, and tasteful vacation photos. It was the polished, professional facade of a modern corporate climber. But Isabella wasn't looking at the surface. She was looking for the cracks. It's all too clean, Isabella murmured, scrolling through years of Sloane's online presence. There are no rough edges, no awkward college photos, no angsty teenage posts. It's like her public life began the day she graduated from business school. Maybe she's just private, Tessa suggested, looking over her sister's shoulder while sipping her morning coffee. No, Isabella countered, her intuition humming. This isn't privacy. This is a fabrication. Damien's life is a performance, and he's chosen a co-star who is just as skilled at playing a role. She started digging deeper, using her art historian skills to cross-reference and search for what wasn't there. She searched for yearbooks, local news archives from Sloane's supposed hometown, anything that predated her polished corporate identity. For days, she found nothing. It was a digital dead end. Frustrated, she shifted her focus. If we can't find her past, let's look at her connection to Damien. She began mapping a timeline. When did Sloane start at Ward Tech International? 3 years ago. She cross-referenced it with Damien's calendar, which she still had access to on a shared cloud account he'd forgotten to revoke. She looked for patterns, for meetings that seemed out of place, for travel itineraries that overlapped. And then she found it, a tiny discrepancy. "Tessa, look at this," she said, her voice sharp with excitement. 6 months after Sloane was hired, she was assigned to Project Lucent. It was a new renewable energy initiative, but according to these internal memos, the project was Damien's pet. He micromanaged every aspect of it. Yet Sloane, a junior executive at the time, was given a senior role. That doesn't fit his MO. He doesn't delegate power. He hoards it. Maybe she impressed him, Tessa offered. Or maybe she had leverage. Isabella's fingers flew across the keyboard. She abandoned the search for Sloane and started digging into Project Lucent itself. It had been a massive success, a technological breakthrough in solar energy storage that had sent Wardtech International's stock soaring and cemented Damien's reputation as a visionary. She pulled up the original patent filings, the technical documents, the press releases, and buried deep in a list of early-stage research consultants, she found a name that made her breath catch in her throat. Dr. Conrad Whitmore. "Whitmore," she whispered. "Tessa, her father's name is Dr. Conrad Whitmore." "It could be a coincidence," Tessa cautioned, but she was already leaning in closer, her lawyer's mind sensing a lead. "No," Isabella said, a cold certainty washing over her. "In Damien's world, there are no coincidences. The search for Dr. Conrad Whitmore was far more fruitful than the one for his daughter. He was an engineer, a brilliant but unassuming academic who had taught at a small university in Pennsylvania. He had published papers on solar energy storage, theories that were groundbreaking but largely ignored by the mainstream corporate world. He had run a small research company in the late 90s and early 2000s. The company had a name, Solaris Labs. Isabella's heart was pounding now. She remembered hearing that name before. She searched her memory, the archives of her mind, and then it hit her. A conversation from years ago, at a dinner party. One of Damien's old business partners, a man named Owen Graves, who'd had a bitter falling out with Damien, had gotten drunk and started rambling. "Damien's a genius, all right," Owen had slurred, his voice thick with resentment. "A genius at recognizing other people's genius and calling it his own. Ask him about Solaris. Ask him how he really got his start." At the time, Isabella had dismissed it as the ramblings of a bitter man. Now it was a Rosetta Stone. With a new, frantic energy, she searched for Solaris Labs and Wardtech International, and there it was. A single, obscure business article from a local Pennsylvania newspaper dated 15 years ago. The headline read, "Local Innovator Sues Tech Giant for Patent Infringement." The story laid it all out. Dr. Conrad Whitmore, the founder of Solaris Labs, had accused a young, up-and-coming Damien Ward of stealing his proprietary research for a new solar storage system. Dr. Whitmore claimed he had met with Ward, signed an NDA, and presented his breakthrough technology, only to have Ward cut off contact and file a nearly identical patent months later. But Damien, even then, was a formidable opponent. He countersued, claiming Dr. Whitmore's research was unsubstantiated and that his own technology was developed independently. He buried the small-town engineer in legal fees and procedural delays. The lawsuit dragged on for years. Solaris Labs went bankrupt. Dr. Conrad Whitmore lost everything. Isabella felt a wave of nausea. This was it. The foundation of Damien's empire, his first great success, was built on a lie. It was built on the ruins of another man's life. She kept digging, her hands shaking. She found Dr. Conrad Whitmore's obituary. He had died 5 years ago. A heart attack. He was only 58. The obituary mentioned he was survived by his loving daughter, Sloane. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with a sickening finality. This wasn't a love affair. This was a war. Sloane Whitmore hadn't seduced Damien Ward for his money or his power. She had infiltrated his life, his company, his bed, for one reason and one reason only: revenge. She was avenging her father. The gala, the public humiliation. It wasn't about leaving a wife for a mistress. It was a perfectly executed act of sabotage. Sloane had manipulated Damien, feeding his ego, encouraging his worst impulses, and steering him towards the most self-destructive path imaginable. She had convinced him that a public, brutal divorce was a power move, a way to show the world that he was a man who took what he wanted without apology. But it was all a trap. She had turned his own arrogance and cruelty into a weapon against him. She had made him the architect of his own downfall, and the paternity lie. It suddenly made perfect, horrifying sense. It wasn't just to silence Isabella. It was to ensure that when the truth about Damien's past came out, as Sloane surely intended it to, Isabella would be seen as a discredited, unreliable narrator, a bitter, cheating ex-wife whose claims would be dismissed. Sloane was isolating him, ensuring that when he fell, there would be no one to catch him. Isabella leaned back, the screen of the laptop blurring before her eyes. She had thought she was a casualty in Damien's war. She now realized she was a pawn in Sloane's, and the game was far from over. Chapter 6. The secret unravels. The revelation hung in the air of the small Brooklyn apartment, thick and suffocating. The story was no longer about a simple, albeit brutal, betrayal. It had morphed into a Greek tragedy, a long-form revenge saga spanning 15 years of simmering hatred. "She's been playing him," Isabella whispered, the words feeling inadequate to describe the sheer scale of the deception. All of it. The affair, the promotion, the advice she gave him. It was all part of a plan to ruin him, just like he ruined her father. Tessa, who had been reading the articles over Isabella's shoulder, sank into a chair, her face pale. This is diabolical. She didn't just want to expose him. She wanted to dismantle him, piece by piece, using his own personality flaws as the tools. The public humiliation wasn't for your benefit. It was for the benefit of his board of directors, his investors. She made him look unstable, erratic, cruel, a liability. Isabella's mind was a whirlwind. Every memory of the past few years was being recontextualized, viewed through this new, terrifying lens. Damien's increasing arrogance, his dismissal of her opinions, his growing isolation from old friends and partners. Had Sloane been whispering in his ear the whole time, stroking his ego while methodically cutting him off from anyone who might ground him? "Owen Graves," Isabella said suddenly. "The partner who had a falling out with Damien, the one who mentioned Solaris Labs. What about him?" "We need to find him," Isabella said, her voice gaining strength. "He's the only other person who knows the truth about Damien's beginnings. If Sloane's plan is to expose the patent theft, she'll need proof, a witness." She might have already gotten to him. Finding Owen Graves proved easier than they expected. After being forced out of WardTech International, he had started his own, much smaller tech consultancy in New Jersey. He was a man who had been burned by Damien Ward and had no reason to protect him. Tessa made the call. She didn't lead with the full story, simply introducing herself as Isabella's legal counsel and mentioning an interest in the early days of WardTech International and a company called Solaris. The silence on the other end of the line was telling. After a long pause, Owen agreed to meet. They met in a nondescript diner halfway between Brooklyn and his office. Owen Graves was older now, his face etched with the lines of stress and disappointment, but his eyes held a sharp intelligence. He looked at Isabella with a mixture of pity and respect. "I saw what he did to you," he said, stirring his coffee. "It was disgusting, but I wasn't surprised. That's the real Damien, the one I saw when he was building his empire on another man's bones." Isabella leaned forward, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "Tell us about Dr. Conrad Whitmore." Owen sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "Conrad was a good man, a brilliant man. He was a decade ahead of his time. He came to us, me and Damien, we were partners then, with a technology that would change the world. We signed an NDA. He trusted us. And Damien saw a shortcut. He saw a path to glory that didn't involve sharing the credit or the profits. He recounted the story in painful detail. The meetings, the stolen data, the sham development process Damien created to cover his tracks. Owen had objected, his conscience screaming at him. But Damien had been ruthless. He had threatened Owen, bought his silence with a larger share of the company, and then, years later, when Owen became a liability, he had forced him out. "I've lived with it for 15 years, Owen said, his gaze distant. The guilt. Watching Damien become this celebrated icon, knowing it was all built on a lie. "Has anyone else contacted you about this?" Tessa asked, her lawyer's instincts sharp. "A woman named Sloane Whitmore?" Owen's head snapped up. His eyes widened in recognition. "Yes, about a month ago. Beautiful woman, red hair, sharp as a tack. She came to me with the whole story. She had her father's old files, his notes, copies of the original NDA. She had everything. She just needed my testimony to corroborate it." "And did you agree?" Isabella asked, her heart pounding. "I did," Owen confirmed. "I told her I would testify. I would tell the world what Damien did. It's time. The man needs to face the music." There it was. The final piece. Sloane had her weapon and it was loaded. She had a credible witness and documentary evidence. The only question was, when would she fire the shot? "She's waiting," Isabella said, thinking aloud as they drove back to Brooklyn. "She's letting the dust from the gala settle. She's letting Damien think he's won. He's isolated himself, discredited his wife, and shown the world his instability. Now he's vulnerable. When she releases this story, no one will stand by him. His board will oust him in a heartbeat to save the company." Tessa glanced at her sister. The transformation was astounding. The broken, weeping woman from the night of the gala was gone. In her place was a strategist, a woman of formidable calm and intelligence. "So what's our move, Izzy?" Tessa asked. "Do we go to the press ourselves? Do we try to get ahead of her?" Isabella was silent for a long time, watching the city lights streak by. Her first instinct was to burn it all down, to expose Damien for the fraud he was, and Sloane for the manipulator she was. But then she thought of her baby. A public war between 3 scorched earth combatants would be a toxic, headline-grabbing inferno. Her child would be born into a circus of scandal. And then there was the other part of it. A strange, unexpected feeling. While she despised Sloane's methods, she couldn't entirely condemn her motives. She understood the primal need for justice for a wronged parent. Sloane's revenge was monstrous, but its roots were in a profound and legitimate grief. No, a public battle was not the answer. That was their game, a game of mutual destruction. She would not play it. She would create her own game, with her own rules. "No," Isabella said finally, her voice steady and clear. "We're not going to the press. We're not going to his board of directors." "Then what are we going to do?" Isabella turned to her sister, her eyes holding a glint of steel that would have been utterly foreign to the woman she was just a few weeks ago. "I'm going to do something no one expects," she said. "Especially not him. I'm going to talk to Damien. I'm going to tell him everything. And I'm going to watch his world fall apart, not in a newspaper, but right in front of my eyes." Chapter 7. The confrontation. Getting a meeting with Damien Ward was, under normal circumstances, a feat that required navigating a gauntlet of assistants and executives. But Isabella had an advantage. She knew his routine. She knew he started every Wednesday with a 7 a.m. meeting at his downtown office, arriving 15 minutes early to review his agenda in the silence of his top-floor sanctuary. She arrived at 6:40 a.m., her pregnancy no longer a vulnerability, but a symbol of her resilience. She was dressed not in the soft pastels Damien had preferred, but in a simple, sharp black dress. She was no longer performing the role of the gentle wife. She was here as herself. The night security guard, a man named Tommy, whom she had always treated with kindness, looked surprised to see her. The restraining order technically barred her from the premises. but its language was specific to causing a disturbance. Isabella's calm demeanor was the opposite of a disturbance. "Ma'am," he began, his expression conflicted. "I don't know if I can let you up." "Tommy," she said, her voice calm and even. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need 5 minutes. It's important, for my child's future." He hesitated, then nodded, his human decency winning out over corporate policy. He buzzed her through the private elevator. The ride up was silent, a slow ascent to the battlefield. She felt a tremor of her old fear, the conditioned response to Damien's power, but she pushed it down. She clutched a simple manila folder in her hands. It didn't contain legal documents or threats. It contained the truth. The elevator doors opened directly into the reception area of Damien's private office. The lights were dim, and there he was, standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the awakening city like a king surveying his domain. He heard the soft chime of the elevator, and turned, his expression of annoyance instantly morphing into one of disbelief, then anger. "Isabella? What the hell are you doing here? You're violating a court order." "The order says I can't harass you, Damien," she said, her voice steady as she stepped out of the elevator. "I'm not here to harass you. I'm here to talk." "We have nothing to talk about. Our lawyers can handle everything." He turned his back on her, a classic power move, dismissing her presence. "They can't handle this," she said, walking further into the room. "This isn't about the divorce. It's about why you really ended our marriage." He scoffed, still not looking at her. "I told you why. I found someone better. Someone who isn't a desperate, lying gold digger. The insult, which would have shattered her weeks ago, now bounced off the armor of her newfound knowledge." "You mean Sloane Whitmore?" she asked, her tone conversational. "Your true partner, the woman who is your equal in every way." She walked over to his desk and placed the manila folder on the polished mahogany surface. "You're right about one thing. She is your equal. In fact, she might even be better than you at your own game." Damien finally turned, a flicker of unease in his cold eyes. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about Solaris Labs," Isabella said, her voice dropping slightly, each word chosen with surgical precision. The name hit him like a physical blow. For the first time since she had known him, Isabella saw a genuine crack in Damien Ward's facade, a flash of pure, unadulterated shock. "I'm talking about Dr. Conrad Whitmore," she continued, pressing her advantage. "A brilliant engineer from Pennsylvania. A man whose research you stole 15 years ago to build this empire. Your first great success, Project Lucent. It was his work, wasn't it, Damien?" He stared at her, speechless. His mind was clearly racing, trying to calculate how she could possibly know this. He had buried that story so deep, he thought it was dead. "You look surprised," Isabella said, a humorless smile on her lips. "You thought you had erased him, but you didn't. You just created a ghost that has been haunting you for the past 3 years. She let the silence stretch, watching the color drain from his face as the pieces began to click into place in his mind. "Sloane," he whispered, the name now tasting like osh in his mouth. "Yes, Damien. Sloane," Isabella confirmed. "Dr. Conrad Whitmore's daughter. You didn't find a mistress. You were targeted. She didn't seduce you for your money. She infiltrated your life for revenge. Every word of praise, every piece of advice, every moment of intimacy. It was all a lie. A performance designed to get close enough to you to destroy you." She watched him process the information, the dawning horror in his eyes. He stumbled back, sinking into his expensive leather chair as if his legs could no longer support him. The king was off his throne. "The gala," she went on, her voice relentless, devoid of emotion. "That was her masterpiece. She knew your ego. She knew your cruelty. She encouraged you to be your worst self, to put on the most brutal, public spectacle imaginable. She knew it would make you look like a monster. And the paternity lie? That was the masterstroke. It wasn't just to hurt me. It was to ensure that when this story comes out, I would have no credibility. Who would believe the ravings of a bitter, cheating wife? Damien looked up at her, his face a mask of utter devastation. The betrayal he had inflicted on her was nothing compared to the abyss of deception that had just opened up beneath him. He had been a puppet, his strings pulled by the daughter of the man he had destroyed. His power, his control, his entire sense of self, it was all an illusion. "She has proof, Damien," Isabella said, her voice softening slightly, not with pity, but with a sense of finality. "She has her father's files, and she has a witness. Owen Graves. He's agreed to testify against you. She's waiting for the right moment to release the story. And when she does, your board will abandon you, your investors will flee, and this entire empire you built on a dead man's dream will crumble." He said nothing. He just stared into the middle distance, his world collapsing around him in the silent, sunlit office. He, Damien Ward, the master of the universe, had been played. He had been humiliated, not by a business rival, but by a woman he had taken to his bed, a woman whose motives he had been too arrogant to ever question. Isabella looked at the broken man in the chair. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a profound, empty sadness for all the lives that had been wrecked by his ambition. She turned and walked back towards the elevator, her work done. "Isabella!" he called out, his voice hoarse, broken. She stopped but didn't turn around. "Why?" he asked. "Why are you telling me this? Why not just let her do it?" Isabella paused, her hand on the elevator button. "Because I'm not like you, Damien. And I'm not like her. I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in truth. And I don't want our child to be born into the middle of a public war." She looked back at him then, one last time. "This is your mess," she said, her voice clear and strong. "You have a choice. You can let her destroy you, or you can get out ahead of it. You can confess, try to salvage what little you have left, and start to atone for what you did. What you do next is up to you. But my life and my child's life will no longer be a part of your story." She pressed the button, and the elevator doors slid open. As she stepped inside, she left him there, a fallen titan in his glass tower, utterly and completely speechless. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The aftermath was not a sudden explosion, but a controlled demolition, orchestrated by a man desperate to salvage something from the wreckage of his life. Damien Ward, for the first time, was not on the offensive. He was in full retreat. 2 days after Isabella's confrontation, he called an emergency press conference. He didn't wait for Sloane to make her move. He preempted her. Standing before a stunned assembly of journalists, looking haggard and humbled, Damien Ward confessed. He didn't confess to everything. His version of the story was carefully spun, framed as a youthful mistake, a competitive overstep, rather than outright theft. He admitted to the aggressive acquisition of technology from Solaris Labs and announced the creation of a massive restitution fund in Dr. Conrad Whitmore's name, to be managed by an independent third party to support young, independent innovators. He painted himself as a man seeking to atone for the sins of his past. He then announced his immediate resignation as CEO of Ward Tech International. The story was a bombshell, but because Damien had controlled the narrative, the company itself was largely insulated. The board accepted his resignation, expressed their shock, and immediately promoted a competent, if uncharismatic, successor. The stock dipped, then stabilized. The empire survived, But the emperor was deposed. Of Sloane Whitmore, Damien said nothing. He simply stated that his engagement was off and that his recent personal behavior had been inexcusable, a result of the immense pressure he had been under. By not naming her, he robbed her of her public victory. Her revenge was complete, but it was also silent. She had toppled the king, but there was no triumphant celebration. She had won the war, but the world would never know the full story of her brilliant, devastating campaign. Sloane Whitmore resigned from Wardtech International the same day. She collected her things, walked out of the building, and vanished. There was speculation, of course. The press connected the dots between her and Dr. Conrad Whitmore, but without a statement from her or a confession from Damien about the true nature of their relationship, it remained just that. Speculation. She had achieved her goal, but in doing so had become a ghost herself, disappearing from the world as quietly as she had entered it. For Damien, the reckoning was personal and profound. He lost his company, his power, his reputation. The sycophants and fair-weather friends who had orbited his star vanished overnight. He was left alone in his cavernous penthouse, a pariah in the city he had once ruled. His public humiliation was not the one Sloane had designed, but it was a humiliation nonetheless, self-inflicted in a desperate act of self-preservation. Isabella watched it all unfold from the quiet safety of Tessa's apartment. She felt a strange detachment, as if watching a play for which she had written the final scene. There was no joy in his downfall, only a quiet sense of closure. The storm had passed. A week after the press conference, a check arrived via courier. It was from Damien's personal account. It wasn't the paltry settlement from the prenup, but a sum 10 times that amount. There was no note, no explanation. It was a silent admission of guilt, a quiet offering. "It's blood money," Tessa said, looking at the check with distaste. "No," Isabella corrected her softly. "It's not for me. It's for the baby. It's the first decent thing he's done. It's a foundation for a life free from him." She used the money to buy a small, charming brownstone in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood in Brooklyn, not far from Tessa. It was the antithesis of the Park Avenue penthouse. It had a small garden in the back, creaky wooden floors, and rooms filled with warm, natural light. It was a home, not a showcase. She spent the last weeks of her pregnancy in a state of peaceful preparation. She painted the nursery herself, not in the designer beige Damien's consultant had chosen, but in a soft, sunny yellow. She filled the room with books and simple wooden toys. She reconnected with old friends from her gallery days, people she had drifted away from during her marriage. They welcomed her back without question, their easy, genuine affection a balm to her soul. She was slowly, carefully, rebuilding her life, not on the ruins of the old one, but on a new, solid foundation of her own making. She started sketching again, her creativity, so long dormant, reawakening with a vibrant energy. Her subjects were no longer grand monuments, but the small, beautiful details of her new life, the way the light hit the leaves in her garden, the face of a sleeping cat, the gentle curve of her own pregnant belly. One evening, Tessa found her sitting in the nursery, quietly rocking in a chair, a serene smile on her face. "You look happy, Izzy," Tessa said, leaning in the doorway. "I am," Isabella replied, placing a hand on her stomach. "I feel free. I feel like myself again. It's strange, isn't it? He had to destroy my life for me to finally be able to live it." The pain of Damien's betrayal had not vanished, but it no longer defined her. It had become a part of her story, a scar that proved she had survived something terrible. She had walked through the fire and emerged not burned, but forged. She was no longer waiting for a new chapter to be written for her. She was holding the pen, and the pages were beautifully, wonderfully blank. The reckoning had come for everyone, but for Isabella, it had cleared the way for a renaissance. Chapter 9. A New Dawn. 3 months later, Noah Elena Ward was born on a crisp January morning, her first cries filling the quiet hospital room with the sound of pure, unadulterated life. She was beautiful and perfect, with a full head of dark hair and eyes that held a startling, wise serenity. Holding her for the first time, Isabella felt a love so fierce and overwhelming it eclipsed everything else. All the pain, all the betrayal, all the drama of the past year melted away, leaving only this tiny, warm, perfect being in her arms. Life in the Brooklyn brownstone settled into a new, beautiful rhythm. It was a rhythm dictated by feedings and diaper changes, by soft lullabies, and the gurgling laughter of a baby discovering her own hands. It was a world away from the frantic, high-stakes universe Damien had inhabited. It was small, it was simple, and it was exquisitely happy. Isabella launched her art consultancy from a small office she set up in a spare bedroom. She started with just one client, an old friend who owned a boutique hotel, helping them acquire pieces from local, emerging artists. Her reputation for having a keen eye and an honest approach grew, and soon, word of mouth brought her more work than she could handle. She was building something of her own, on her own terms, fueled by her own talent. She was no longer a reflection of a man's success. She was the source of her own. One Saturday afternoon, as she was sketching in the garden while Noah napped in a bassinet nearby, the doorbell rang. Her heart gave a familiar, nervous flutter. She wasn't expecting anyone. She opened the door to find Damien standing on her doorstep. He was a changed man. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet, hesitant uncertainty. He was thinner, and there were new lines of exhaustion around his eyes. He was no longer the titan of industry, just a man standing on a porch, looking lost. "Damien," she said, her voice even, betraying none of the turmoil his presence stirred. "Isabella," he said, his voice quiet. "I know I have no right to be here, but I heard about the baby. I saw the announcement Tessa posted. A girl. Noah." He said the name softly, as if testing the feel of it. "Yes," Isabella said simply. He shuffled his feet, his gaze falling to the ground. I was wondering if I might see her." Isabella looked at him, at this man who had tried to deny his own child's existence in front of the world. The old anger was still there, a low, simmering coal, but it was tempered by something else. Looking at him now, stripped of his power and his pride, she didn't see a monster. She saw a broken, lonely man grappling with the devastating consequences of his own choices. And then she looked back towards the garden, where her daughter was sleeping peacefully in the afternoon sun. This wasn't about her pride or his redemption. It was about Noah. One day, Noah would have questions. One day, she would want to know her father. To deny him now would be to plant a seed of resentment and unanswered questions in her daughter's life. It would be a decision based on her own pain, not her child's future. She had the power now, the power to grant access, the power to refuse, the power to be gracious, or the power to be cruel. She had learned from Damien what cruelty looked like, and she wanted no part of it. "All right," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "You can see her. But there are rules, Damien. This is my home, my life. You are a visitor here. There will be no drama, no arguments. You will be respectful, always." He looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and profound gratitude. Of course, anything. "Thank you, Isabella." She led him through the house into the garden. He looked around at the cozy, lived-in space, so different from the cold, sterile perfection of their old life. He saw her sketchpad, the half-finished drawing of a sleeping baby. He saw the simple, happy life she had built without him. He stood over the bassinet, looking down at his daughter for the first time. Noah stirred, her tiny rosebud mouth opening in a small yawn. A wave of emotion washed over Damien's face. Regret, awe, a deep, aching sadness for all that he had lost, for all that he had thrown away. A single tear traced a path down his cheek. Isabella watched from a distance. This was not forgiveness. Forgiveness was a long, winding road she wasn't sure she was ready to travel, but it was a beginning. It was a form of redemption. Not for him, but for her. It was the ultimate act of moving on, of showing that his actions no longer had the power to hurt her. She was the master of her own life now, the protector of her daughter, the architect of her own happiness. The new dawn was here, and it was bright, and it was all hers. The man who had tried to humiliate her was now asking for permission to be a small part of the beautiful world she had created in his absence. And in that quiet moment, in a sun-drenched Brooklyn garden, that felt like the only victory that ever truly mattered. And that's where Isabella's story of betrayal finds its new beginning. It's a powerful reminder that our lowest moments can often become the foundation for our greatest strengths. What did you think of Julian's attempt at redemption? Do you believe someone like him can truly change? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates a story of resilience and empowerment. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the complexities of the human heart. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.